Hi, this is Victor Morganti from Fact Engine. In this video I'll be explaining the importance of primary reference schemes for entity types in object role modeling. We're looking at the Boston conceptual modeling software in front of us, which is used for creating object role models. Let's drag an entity type onto a page for an object role model. So a new entity type is created, and we'll just give that a name. Let's call it person. So within our conceptual schema, we want an entity type called person. If I click on the canvas there, you'll see that it turns red. Now red indicates that there's an error related to the particular model element displayed on the page. Down below in the error list toolbox, you can see the actual error. So the error ID is 105, and the description is entity type requires a reference scheme error. Entity type person. So person requires a primary reference scheme. Now what does that mean? Now a entity type without a primary reference scheme is like a table in a relational database without a primary key. Although there are a plethora of databases that allow you to create tables without a primary key, the relational model mandates that you do have primary keys for tables, and it makes sense that if you're going to be using a relational model that you do have primary keys. So let's create a entity relationship diagram for that particular entity type and see what happens. So I've got a page there created already for an entity relationship diagram. If we go to the Model Explorer, I can see there's already a person entity created within Boston, and let's drag that onto the page. Automatically it comes up with an error or a warning. It says the entity person does not seem to have any attributes at this stage. Make sure that the corresponding model element in your object role model at least has a primary reference scheme. Entities in entity relationship diagrams in Boston have their attributes created by the relative relations of the corresponding model element in your object role model. That is, make sure that the entity type person at least has a primary reference scheme in your object role model. So let's go back to the object role model now. Click and right click on the person entity type and let's go to its properties, and let's give it a reference mode or a primary reference scheme, and we're going to say ID. Now what that says is that each person within our schema for the person entity type is uniquely identified by their ID. Now in Boston you can right click on the entity type and expand the reference scheme to see what's going on. So a primary reference scheme is actually a relationship saying that a person has a person ID. Now we selected ID as the reference mode. So let's hide the reference scheme now and go back to our entity relationship diagram, open the model dictionary, and we can now see that the entity person has at least one attribute, which is person ID, and we can drag that onto the page, and there we have a person entity with a primary key notified by the hash, and it's mandatory, and that is person ID. If we go back to our object role model, right click and expand the reference scheme, we can see that there's a mandatory constraint on the fact type linking person to person ID, and so we've set up a primary key for our related entity in our entity relationship diagram by giving person a primary reference scheme, or in this case a reference mode of ID. Now in another video, which you'll be able to find in the collection on YouTube, I show how to create a compound reference scheme. So if you wanted to say first name and last name was the unique identifier or the primary key for an entity person, you can create that as well. But that's the importance of primary reference schemes and reference modes in object role modeling, and you'll notice that in our error list the error has now gone away because we've created that primary reference scheme. Thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.